As expected, a lawsuit against Cloud Imperium Games, Robert Space Industries, the makers of Star Citizen, has been more or less decided. It's been dismissed without prejudice. Now, for those of you looking for refunds, don't despair. Dismissing without prejudice means that it can be refiled at a later date. Dismissing with prejudice means that it cannot be. It invokes double jeopardy, essentially. So those upset with this decision, don't lose heart completely. Attack of the Fanboy actually covers this, and I'm going to look at this. I'm going to look at the Reddit post, and I'm going to look at the Robert Space Industries terms of service for this, as well as provide my own anecdote from about 8 years ago. Attack of the Fanboy. Star Citizen backers no longer able to get refunds. Buyer beware. And the buyer beware is very valid for this article. You'll see why in a second. Backers of the infamous Star Citizen project no longer have any means of demanding refunds from its developer, Cloud Imperium Games, herein referred to as SIG. Considering the project's current reputation, this probably won't come as much of a shock to the wider gaming audience. However, it really shouldn't surprise anyone since the writing's been on the wall for quite some time now. Normal means of pursuing refunds were effectively removed from Star Citizen's June 6, 2016 Terms of Service update, but it wasn't until December 2017 that SIG ceased issuing them entirely. Since then, the developer has just been sitting on refund demands. One backer, a Reddit user going by the handle Firefly212, decided that they weren't going to take such treatment sitting down. They sued SIG in U.S. Small Claims Court, filing their claim in early June. The court date was set for July 13th, and the results came back the same day. Now, I want to make this very clear. He filed it in June. I believe it said early June? Yeah, early June, and July 13th. I'm going to be honest with you. That's actually a really good turnaround time. That means that SIG responded almost immediately as soon as they got the paperwork. They didn't drag it out, which is really credit where it's due. A company responding immediately and not dragging out the proceedings, that's almost unheard of. But at the same time, this was in small claims court, where apparently in the state of California, lawyers are not involved, which means SIG couldn't use the usual stalling tactic to rake up the legal defense fees or the legal fees for the plaintiff. They didn't have that option. So that might be the reason why they decided to just get it over with. According to Firefly212 in a Reddit thread entitled, "I lost in court, the judge declined to hear anything regarding the TOS's conscionability or lack of consideration. As for SIG, who sent a representative of their interests, they were able to successfully argue that the arbitration clause present in the current TOS should be applied to transactions that occurred before it existed, despite the very first sentence of the Star Citizen Terms of Service stating otherwise." Going over to the Terms of Service, this is the most recent one. "These terms of service do not affect any transactions made before its effective date. All prior transactions are governed by the terms of service in effect at the date of such transactions." Now, this is essentially the exact opposite of a grandfather clause. In general, a terms of service will have a grandfather clause to help protect the consumer, or at least give the appearance of protecting the consumer. It says that if anything in this supersedes whatever was in a previous version of the terms of service, you are protected no matter what, and you can also be penalized no matter what. Now, many times courts tend to look at terms of service and say you can't punish them for what was in a previous terms of service. At the same time, they'll turn around and say, no, they're protected by your terms of service because of the grandfather clause. It's a double-edged sword, and what Robert Space Industries is attempting to do is the exact opposite. They're trying to say that any transaction made before the date this terms of service goes into effect is not protected or governed by this terms of service. I'm actually not sure how to feel about that. I'm really not. And I'm wondering if the plaintiff, if Firefly actually made that argument. How does this work? How can the terms of service not protect me? Or rather, how can the terms of service say it doesn't apply to me, but the company says it can? How does that work? I'm assuming he didn't get a chance because any judge or magistrate would have sat down, leaned back and gone, oh, wow, hold on. No, he makes a really compelling argument there. How does that not work? And the defendant, Cloud Imperium Games, would have been forced to answer that. They essentially shot themselves in the foot by doing this, because this first line no longer, well, first two lines, whatever, it no longer applies. They can take that out and there's nothing that can be done. I think for legal reasons they have to have something like that available, but it's immaterial at this point. This, in effect, means that Firefly 212 lost their case. He didn't lose the case. Once again, it was dismissed without prejudice. He can file again. In the future, if the arbitration he's been sent to, he's not happy with it. I attempted arbitration, Your Honor, but the arbitration was done in such a way that it is very obvious that I would get absolutely nothing. It would not settle the dispute. It would not give me sufficient legal remedy. It was dismissed by the judge and sent to arbitration as demanded by the current version of the Star Citizen Terms of Service. Considering that the current Terms of Service effectively removes all rights to refunds, it's probably safe to say that Firefly won't be getting their money back. It doesn't end here, though. To find out what exactly this turn of events means for SIG and Star Citizen's backers, we now turn to a man by the name of Derek Smart. Smart is an independent game developer who's been following SIG's antics very closely over the past few years. Through his personal website, he's been maintaining a forum which, among other things, has meticulously documented and laid out plainly all the changes to Star Citizen's TOS since 2015. As shown in the thread dedicated to it, SIG has removed almost all backers' rights through their revisions. This includes SIG's obligation to be financially accountable to their backers, something that they explicitly promised during the project's initial drive for funding. Now, once again, this is why I believe the Crytek lawsuit actually has a lot of damaging potential to SIG. During discovery, they can request, and most likely will be granted, that SIG be accountable, that they explain where each and every penny has come from their backers, from ship sales, from land sales, from subscriptions to their videos and their website, their Kickstarter, and then an accounting of where each and every penny has been spent in terms of development and other sundry expenses. And I think this is what Chris Roberts is actually terrified of. He's terrified of it getting out that a lot of this money is not being spent on the game. A lot of this money is probably being spent on frivolous items. See, the Kickstarter thing, the backing of the game, has a lot of stipulations to it, a lot of legal requirements placed on Cloud Imperium Games and Robert Space Industries. If he's not spending the money as he said he would, if he's instead spending it on a new house or something like that, and he's not disclosing this, he's actually running in violation of multiple federal laws. The Federal Trade Commission will be involved. A lot of federal companies, a lot of federal agencies will be involved, and he will face hefty fines, as well as the numerous lawsuits that will be filed against him. Chris Roberts is terrified of this Crytek lawsuit, and for good reason. I firmly believe at this point that he's got nothing. He has no defense for why it has taken so long and why it has taken so much money that he claims, and he still doesn't have enough money, he says. They do not have enough money, despite multiple times saying that they've raised more than the money that they need. See, a lot of defenders like to say that critics have absolutely no idea of game development and how a game is developed and the like. And you're right. From a back-end standpoint, I have absolutely no idea of coding. I have absolutely no idea of the business aspect. What I do understand is 10, 12 years of alphas and closed betas, multiple video games that I have participated in the closed beta of, several World of Warcraft expansions in which I was very vocal in some of the issues that were coming up. Most notably Ark, in which I did a video showcasing an issue that Studio Wildcard said they could not reproduce. We got to the bottom of it, and it is still one of my most widely viewed videos on this channel. I am not a stranger to actually helping with the development of a game. I also have this uncanny sense of knowing when I'm being bullshitted to. And that's exactly what Cloud Imperium Games and Robert Space Industries are doing. They're bullshitting us. They apparently don't really have to deliver a final product either. The list goes on, but for now we must return to the topic of refunds. Now it goes into Derek Smart's claims. You know, he saw this coming in June. He said this, fine, whatever. It doesn't really matter. As Smart states above, a precedent has been set now that this has happened. Backers who want to try and force the issue and sue SIG now have next to no chance of getting anywhere in small claims court. One is tempted to say that they could just band together and pursue a class action lawsuit, but that route has already been closed off by Star Citizen's TOS. Technically, no. Courts have ruled in the United States for decades. You cannot sign away your rights. You have the right to file a lawsuit in order to demand a refund. You aren't guaranteed to get it, but you have the right to do so. And the court will listen to arguments and the like. Now, whether it gets past the initial motion state or not is up to the court's decision. But normally, 9 times out of 10, I will say, these courts will want to listen to oral arguments. They will want to delve into it. They'll want to ask questions because just writing is so time consuming and it's just not an effective way of doing so. They will want to listen to the oral arguments and they'll make a decision after that. One is, I already read that. Very recent backers still have the possibility of requesting a refund, but it must be processed within 14 days of their pledge. Given that SIG has previously seen fit to simply not respond to refund requests, those thinking about contributing to the project would do well to think twice before doing so, because now once one has pledged money to Star Citizen, there is absolutely no going back. Cloud Imperium Games have made sure of it. Not completely true, that's a little bit of hyperbole, but he's not far from the mark either. Their decision to make the arguments they did actually does kind of paint them into a negative position. They actually did shoot themselves in the foot, kind of. They've said that their terms of service apply only when they say it applies. That's not how it's supposed to work. They're saying that their entire terms of service is open to the interpretation of the company, which I'm going to be honest with you. I think the judge is allowing the arbitration to go forward, or the magistrate or whatever, is allowing it to go forward so that it can be refiled. The kid can come back and go, I attempted to do arbitration. It did not offer a legal remedy. I wish for the court to listen to this. And the judge is going to be like, okay, let's listen. Let's listen. Robert Space Industries, get your guy in here now. And they're going to hee and haw and poo-poo and all that. And they're not going to have anything. They're not. They might try to have it moved to an actual venue where there's a lawyer present, but they're not going to have anything beyond that. Going over to the Reddit post. First, I would like to thank all of you who have given helpful advice or offered words of encouragement. Though I lost today, I don't want to come off as salty. Okay, fine. As my case was in small claims, there were no lawyers. SIG RSI sent someone to represent their interests, but I don't wish to name them as some people aren't so civil on the internet. My first point is that the incivility comes from the Star Citizen backers. I've shown my own email previously from a Star Citizen backer who threatened to rape the women in my family because I was critical of Star Citizen. Sid Alpha has had multiple threats against his family because he's critical of it. Failure to Report has had threats against him and his family because, once again, they're critical. Criticism does not give you the right to make death threats or threats of physical violence against other people, but because these people are low IQ, low testosterone, neck-bearded, overweight, socially inept motherfuckers, they think that this is okay. This is the proper response to somebody saying, no, your game is shit, your decisions are shit, and you should be criticized for it. If you can't accept that, I don't know what to say. In mediation, SIG RSI would not agree to refund the portion of my account not covered by the arbitration agreement. Mediation, a lot of small claims courts will force that upon you to begin with. It's pretty much a neutral arbitrator, a legitimately neutral arbitrator who will listen to both sides and try to come to an agreement. And then if that can't happen, the arbitrator, or rather the mediator, goes to the magistrate and says, can't happen, let's listen to the case, you have to listen to the case, etc. Arbitration is different. Arbitration is picked up by the company. And the individual who's in charge of the arbitration, the arbitrator, is beholden to the company. They're going to do everything they can to make sure the company loses the least amount of skin off of its back. It is not, despite their claim of being on your side, they are not. So don't fall for that. They are not on your side. You are not paying them. They have an inherent conflict of interest. The lawyers aren't permitted. SIG lawyers drafted and submitted statements that were permitted. I'm a little, I don't know how to respond to that, honestly. In my own case, they attempted to do something like this, and it was thrown out because the individuals who drafted the statements were not available for my cross-examination. Maybe California is different. The judge declined to hear anything about the conscionability or lack of consideration in the terms of service. Despite the top sentence of the terms of service, SIG successfully argued that the arbitration clause should be applied to transactions even before the clause existed. This is probably because anytime they change the terms of service, you have to go down, you have to pretend to read it, and you have to hit that OK, and then they go, well, you pressed OK here, you accept this. Doesn't matter what we put on here, you accept it, you accept what we decide is applicable. SIG repeatedly argued that there is a playable game and that funds have been earned, but the judge did not rule that either. That's a big sticking point, actually. The judge, the magistrate more than likely, did not rule that there is a playable game and that funds have been earned. I think that's going to come back if and when he refiles after arbitration. Following application of arbitration clause to transactions outside covered dates, court orders matter to arbitration. Case is dismissed without prejudice. Once again, without prejudice means he can refile later, and I think the court actually did him a favor here. Once again, all of you wanting a refund, you're going to have to take the temporary L here. You're going to have to accept this immediate loss because later on, the win is going to be that much more sweet. And it's going to do a lot more damage to SIG if that's what you want it to do. All the people defending or happy that he lost this case ignore the fact, the very salient point that this sets a precedent that they don't want, because in the future they are going to have a matter in which they want a refund, and that company can look back to this and say, well, here's the legal precedent, we don't have to give it. And they're going to hee and haw and they're going to cry because it's not fair they weren't given the refund they were entitled to. How dare someone use their, how dare they be hoist on their own petard? Now I'm going to end this with my own anecdote, and I realize this video is going longer than I intended. I actually intended this to be a 10-minute video, but yeah, I'm really bad at doing that. Even I'll admit this. I sued Hewlett-Packard in 2010. I sued them because they were one of the biggest OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, and there was an NVIDIA issue called Bumpgate going on. Now, essentially all NVIDIA graphics units produced between two certain dates were improperly soldered, or the material was low quality and they were overheating and dying at a very rapid pace. OEMs were putting out a BIOS update that were causing, for all laptops with NVIDIA GPUs, mind you, that were forcing fans to run 24/7, powered on, powered off, powered up, or powered down. It didn't matter. And laptops are not intended for that. My laptop, within 10 months of buying it, had died. They attempted to say that I had had it for 2 years. I didn't, but, whatever. Now, when I filed my small claim, Hewlett-Packard called me, and they tried to say, yeah, you send the computer back to us, we give you $400 for it. Once again, because they claimed I had had it for like 2 years and I hadn't, but neither here nor there. I declined it. And the first day we went to court, took about 2 months to set that up, but first day I went, there was an issue where their representative didn't show up. He didn't show up because he essentially admitted he didn't watch the news. And every news article, every news story was about this massive water main break that was tying up traffic. He didn't make it. When I got home after the default judgment in my favor, I called the court and was told that it had been rescheduled because he couldn't, have known about that. Now, I was a little incensed, whatever, but at the same time, I wanted to argue my case, so I did. The second day, I showed up with a 10-inch binder full of papers, documentation from Charlie Demergian, who was writing for Semi-Accurate and whatnot. And it went over the entire history of what came to be known as Bumpgate. And their representative tried to argue that none of it matters because these were not certified repairs or certified technicians or anything like that. I think what really got to the judge, though, or the magistrate rather, was that I was able to show that Hewlett-Packard had actually agreed with NVIDIA, and NVIDIA had sent aside money to specifically make it so that victims of this, and I use the term victims, whatever, but the people who were suffering from this would not have to pay for their own repairs for something that was clearly defective. But OEMs like Hewlett-Packard and everything only covered a very small portion of their laptop lines. The model numbers didn't cover everything that had a defective GPU. And they tried to use that. So they would actually charge me $800 to fix the motherboard. And then they'd go back and put in a request for a refund from NVIDIA. I think the magistrate was swayed by that. In the end, I ended up winning. I ended up winning because I stood my ground despite the fact that they were attempting a lot of stuff. They were attempting a lot of stuff behind the scenes to make it so that I would get nothing. And one of the big things that I think really should be mentioned here is that they attempted to put statements made by their company into evidence. When my statement from my independent repair technician I had tried to put in, opposing representative actually tried to argue that because he's not there to cross-examine, I shouldn't be allowed to. And the magistrate agreed. And when he tried to do the exact same thing using executives from their company, I made the same argument, and he was incensed. He was incensed that I would try to stop them from being able to make their defense. But the magistrate agreed with me. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. At the end of this 25-minute video, what I'm going to say to Star Citizen backers who want a refund, don't be dismayed by this. You may have lost temporarily, but a temporary loss does not mean that you've completely lost. You haven't. Stick it out, wait a couple of months, and watch how this plays out, because SIG has this uncanny ability to shove their foot down their throat. They will do it again. And when they do, you will win. We all will win. Because judgments against companies like this always help out all of us wanting consumer rights. And the vociferous defenders such as Montoya, who intentionally cherry-pick data and lie in order to prop up this failed venture, they're going to be eating crow. And that is far more amusing to all of us, I think, than a simple win for one person.